Have you ever noticed that imagining the end of the world doesn't always feel frightening, but sometimes, strangely enough, it feels like a relief? It is a curious paradox that so many of us share. This quiet fascination with stories of collapse, of empty cities, of nature reclaiming the concrete, and of everything simply stopping. And while it might seem unsettling at first glance, you are certainly not alone in feeling this pull. Welcome, and thank you for taking a moment to sit with these thoughts today, as we are going to explore a subject that feels heavy but is actually quite full of light. Looking at why our minds drift toward the apocalypse, not because we want destruction, but because we are secretly looking for something else entirely. Something that has to do with meaning, simplicity, and a pause that never ends. It is worth asking yourself why, when you are stressed or overwhelmed by the noise of modern life, you might find yourself scrolling through news of impending doom, or choosing a movie where civilization falls apart. And instead of feeling panicked, you feel a strange sense of calm settle over you. This is the curiosity loop we are stepping into. The idea that the obsession with endings isn't really about the end at all, but rather about a desire to clear the board and see what truly matters when the distractions are stripped away. Many people notice that our lives are filled with an incredible amount of complexity. A web of digital notifications, social expectations, financial pressures, and endless choices that require our constant attention. And against this backdrop, the idea of an apocalypse operates almost like a fantasy of radical simplification. When we watch characters in these stories, we see them stripped of their job titles, their credit scores, their social media followings, and their 5-year plans. And suddenly, their lives are reduced to the absolute essentials of food, shelter, safety, and loved ones. There is a part of us, perhaps a tired part, that looks at that stripped-down existence and thinks that, despite the danger, there is a profound clarity there that is missing from our actual lives. It can feel like we are constantly juggling 100 different balls, afraid to drop even one. And the fantasy of a world-ending event is simply the permission to put all the balls down at once. It is not that we want people to get hurt or for the world to suffer, but rather that we are fatigued by the maintenance of modern existence. And the apocalypse narrative offers a scenario where none of that maintenance matters anymore. You might find that this fascination grows stronger during times of personal or global uncertainty, which leads us to an interesting realization about how we process the future. We live in an era where the future feels vague and unwritten, a source of low-level anxiety that hums in the background of our days. But a story about the end of the world provides a definitive conclusion, a concrete narrative arc where the worst has already happened, and there is no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. This is the part many people don't expect, that the anticipation of disaster is often more exhausting than the disaster itself. So mentally placing ourselves in a post-apocalyptic world removes the burden of anticipation. We no longer have to worry about whether the economy will crash, or if we are saving enough for retirement, or if we are on the right career paths. Because in these stories, those systems no longer exist. And that absence of future tense anxiety creates a paradoxical feeling of presence. People often describe a sensation of vicarious focus when watching these narratives, a feeling that if the world ended, they would finally know exactly what they were supposed to do, which is simply to survive and protect the people they care about. In our current lives, what we are supposed to do is rarely clear. As we navigate moral gray areas, office politics, and the pressure to self-optimize. But in the landscape of survival, the moral universe simplifies. And the difference between a good day and a bad day becomes immediate and tangible. It is compelling to imagine a life where your actions have a direct, visible impact, where building a fire or finding clean water is an undeniable victory, unlike the abstract victories of sending an email or filing a tax return. This connects deeply to a sense of agency that many feel they have lost. As modern systems are so vast and interconnected that it is easy to feel small and powerless. Like a passenger in a vehicle, no one is steering. But in the fantasy of the apocalypse, the systems break and the individual becomes significant again. You see this theme return over and over, the idea of the ordinary person, who discovers they are capable of extraordinary resilience once the guardrails of civilization are removed. And there is a quiet confidence we borrow from these stories, a way of testing ourselves safely from the comfort of our living rooms. It allows us to ask, who would I be if everything was stripped away? And the answer we hope for is that we would be brave, capable, and authentic, no longer defined by what we own or how we look, but by who we are at our core. Here is why the idea keeps returning, even when we are happy. It touches on a longing for community and shared fate that is often absent in a hyper-individualized world. In our normal lives, we are frequently separated by walls, fences, screens, and differing schedules, leading to a pervasive sense of isolation, even in crowded cities. But apocalypse narratives almost always center on a small band of survivors who must rely on each other completely. There is a deep, primal comfort in that interdependence. The knowledge that you are essential to the group and the group is essential to you, creating a bond that goes beyond polite conversation or social obligation. Many people find themselves drawn to this tribe dynamic, not because they want the danger that necessitates it, but because they crave the intimacy and the undeniable purpose of sticking together against the odds. It is a shared fate, a situation where everyone is in the same boat. And the superficial differences that usually divide us, politics, class, status, evaporate in the face of a much larger reality. It can feel like a remedy for loneliness. Imagining a world where human connection is the only currency that has any value left. Furthermore, there is an aesthetic aspect to this fascination that is rarely spoken about. A kind of melancholic beauty in the imagery of ruins and nature reclaiming the world. We see scenes of vines growing over skyscrapers, of deer grazing in abandoned shopping malls, of silence falling over highways that were once choked with traffic. And for some, this imagery feels peaceful rather than tragic. It represents a long exhale for the planet, a sense that even if human systems fail, life itself is resilient and will continue, which can be a strangely comforting thought when we feel the weight of environmental anxiety. It reframes the end of our world not as the end of everything, but as a transformation, a return to a wilder, quieter state of being where the relentless noise of industry and technology is silenced. This specific type of silence is something many of us are starving for. A silence that isn't just the absence of sound, but the absence of demand. Think about how rare it is to be truly unreachable, to have zero expectations placed upon you for even an hour, and then expand that feeling to a lifetime. That is what the apocalypse offers as a psychological escape. It is the ultimate snow day, a permanent suspension of the rules and requirements that govern our waking hours. Of course, this does not mean we actually wish for suffering, or the loss of conveniences like hot showers and medicine. But our minds are capable of separating the metaphor from the reality, allowing us to enjoy the feeling of release without genuinely wanting the consequences. It's commonly felt that this interest peaks when we feel trapped, whether by a job we dislike, a relationship that isn't working, or a society that feels increasingly hostile. And in those moments, the fantasy of a hard reset becomes a way to cope. It is a mental exercise in burning it all down so that something new can grow, a reflection of the natural cycle of death and rebirth that we see in the seasons but often deny in our own rigid structures. We are constantly told that we must build, accumulate, and progress, that the line must always go up. But deep down, we know that things also need to end, to decompose, and to rest. The obsession with apocalypse is, in many ways, a rebellion against the pressure of infinite growth and eternal continuity. It is a recognition that things cannot go on like this forever, and a safe space to explore what it might look like when they stop. And this brings us to a quiet realization that often sits just beneath the surface of these thoughts. Perhaps we are not looking for the end of the world, but the end of a specific version of the world that feels unsustainable to our spirits. We are looking for an exit door from the treadmill of comparison and consumption. And because there is no socially acceptable way to simply step off the treadmill, we imagine the machine breaking down entirely. It is a way of externalizing an internal desire for change, projecting our need for a personal revolution onto a global canvas. When we feel stuck, the apocalypse represents movement. When we feel numb, it represents intense feeling. When we feel fragmented, it represents a singular focus. It is also interesting to note how these stories allow us to process grief and loss in a container that feels manageable. We all carry personal griefs, losses, and fears about mortality, and usually we have to push them aside to get through the workday. But a story about the end of the world brings those themes front and center, allowing us to touch the sadness of loss without it being our own direct tragedy. It is a rehearsal for the inevitable changes life brings, a way of practicing saying goodbye to things we love, which is a fundamental part of the human experience that we rarely get to practice. Some notice that after watching a film about the end of the world, or reading a book about a dystopian future, they look at their actual lives with a renewed sense of gratitude. The warm cup of coffee, the sound of a loved one breathing, the electric lights turning on with a switch. These small miracles suddenly regain their wonder when we have spent 2 hours imagining a world without them. In this way, the obsession acts as a calibration tool, shaking us out of our complacency and helping us see the abundance that is already right in front of us. It is a way of waking ourselves up, of remembering that stability is fragile and therefore precious. We don't watch these things to despair, we watch them to remember how to cherish. As we drift deeper into this reflection, consider the idea that the apocalypse is the ultimate story of now. In our normal lives, we are almost always living in the future or the past, planning for next week or regretting yesterday. But in a survival scenario, there is only the immediate present moment. You have to pay attention to the terrain, to the weather, to the sounds around you. And this state of hyper-awareness is something the human brain is wired for, yet rarely gets to use in a safe environment. It is a form of mindfulness, aggressive and gritty, but mindfulness nonetheless. We are pulled toward it because we want to feel that alive, that connected to the physical reality of the world, rather than floating in the digital abstraction that makes up so much of our time. It's a desire to feel the ground under our feet and know that it is real. And perhaps, too, there is a sense of relief in the idea of shared vulnerability. We spend so many energy trying to be strong, invulnerable, and put together, hiding our cracks and our fears, but in the end of the world scenario, everyone is broken. Everyone is vulnerable, and there is no shame in it anymore. The pretense drops. You don't have to pretend to be okay when the sky is falling. That permission to be openly vulnerable, to be scared, and to need others is a powerful magnet for the human heart. It suggests that our obsession is not morbid, but deeply human. A call for authenticity in a world that often demands performance. As we come to the end of this exploration, it is helpful to view this fascination not as something to be fixed or worried about, but as a signal from your own mind about what you might be needing. Perhaps more simplicity, more connection, more contact with nature, or just a momentary release from the pressure to be constantly becoming something better. It is okay to find comfort in the quiet of a ruined city in your imagination. It is okay to feel a sense of peace when you imagine the systems stopping. It doesn't mean you are giving up on life. It means you are looking for a different way to live, one that feels more grounded and true. The apocalypse in our minds is often just a dramatic word for a new beginning. It is the clearing of the underbrush so that new light can reach the forest floor. So the next time you find yourself drawn to these stories, or catching yourself staring out the window wondering, what if? Let yourself sit with that feeling without judgment. Recognize it as a desire for clarity, for a reset, and for a life that feels manageable and meaningful. It is a testament to your resilience that even when imagining the end of everything, what you are really looking for is the core of what makes life worth living. Thank you for walking through this landscape with me today. If this reflection resonated with you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for being here.